You're listening to the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by Dr. George Samueli and Martin J. And we're discussing, lucky that we still can, freedom of speech. We also talk about Elon Musk and just how productive he is. I was saying in the break that he's got at least 12 children by 3 different women. And one of his children, his son, it's called X. And that's part of the inspiration for the change of name for Twitter, which he bought for $44 billion. Education all the way. And talking of education, in 2023, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act became law. But basically, the government has turned around and said they're not going to enact it now. The implementation has been stopped, basically due to concerns about potential harm to student welfare. And the government has said they're not going to enforce the act and may consider actually repealing it. What the act did, it required universities, colleges and students' union in England to ensure lawful freedom of speech on campus, basically, and concerns arose about protecting hate speech and overlooking minority group safety and so on and so forth. And the OFS will now focus on financial security for universities rather than free speech. And I've been speaking to a number of people, including the alumni for free speech, brilliant people there, and they always quote Obama, who said, "I don't agree that when you become students at college, you have to be coddled and protected from different points of view." Now, their take on this is like many others, and this is a quote from them, many others involved in trying to strengthen free speech at universities, AFFS was shocked by the new Secretary of State's actions. Given the obvious lack of substance in the reasons given, we can only assume that this act of legislative vandalism was motivated by petty political tribalism and a willingness to succumb to lobbying by self-interest university trade bodies, which had already resisted the legislation. It's an extraordinary step where you have legislation introduced, it even got royal assent, and they basically turn around and say they're not going to implement it. What's your take on this, Martin?
I'm flabbergasted. I mean, my view of British universities, I don't think it's been lower. I mean, they are just appalling bastions of wokeism, you know. And the problem is you have this wokeism now, which is all over the place. And you know, the idea that you have freedom of speech in these places is just nonsense, absolutely nonsense. I mean, I have a number of interns from British universities who work for Levantis and for Morebi. And I was recently cancelled by Sheffield University because I had the audacity to tell one of my interns from Sheffield University that her work wasn't very good. And she took this rather badly and made a complaint against me and said that my mannerisms and the tone and how I communicated with her on WhatsApp was inappropriate. And, you know, they had a huge row with the college dean on the subject, and they basically cancelled me and said, you know, you can't talk to students like that. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you can't give them your opinion. You know, we are supposed to praise them. We are supposed to lift them up and fill them with positive feeling. And this whole praise culture was explained to me, you know, which seemed to me to be sort of some horrific kind of 1930s German Nazi sort of scenario where, you know, you are basically controlled by the thought police. And so freedom of speech, British universities, I'm not swallowing it at all. You know, I think that this is just nonsense. It seems to me that if you say this draft legislation was in the pipeline and it's just been spiked very recently, then I'm wondering whether this is focus groups that got involved and realized that it's just going to be, you know, the basis of ridicule with the press. You know, you said earlier about a cartoon. I've got a cartoon for you, which I can't forget. And I remember this when I was being sued, when I was being had up by the Belgian state, who basically wanted to strip me of every asset I had and throw me in jail because I identified the people at the heart of the paedophile scandal. I remember I think it was Private Eye, who ran a cartoon of a very old judge, High Court judge in the UK, who looked a bit senile. As he was leaning over, he was pointing at somebody in the witness box, and he said, "Now we've heard all your views about free speech. Now shut up." And I think this is very symbolic of that sums it up, isn't it? You know, I mean, free speech is really a farce. No matter what level you take it at, it's just farcical. It's often a sort of raw material that politicians use basically to to cultivate the parameters whereby they can actually control the flow of information and the narrative. And what George was saying earlier, is very worrying. In Europe and America, just about everywhere now, you're having these new digital safety kind of laws coming in, which have been dressed up as the big state protecting you, from disinformation. But the problem with that, of course, is that we know from history that when governments have the opportunity to manipulate information via the press, whether we want to talk about the two Gulf Wars, where they totally controlled the narrative and more or less invented this phrase, fake news. We know that governments can't be trusted, and the EU certainly can't be trusted to be that policeman. Do we need a policeman at all? The interesting thing I think also wanted to point out is that this idea that we need protecting from the ugly side of free speech. Okay, we had in the UK a few people who made some racist comments and incited hatred. And a lot of sensible people would say something needs to be done about that. But the problem is no one has the answer, because the problem is that the internet is really a feral beast. And it's one of the beauties, the success of the internet, the success of social media is that it is that feral and uncontrolled and, really out of control in many ways. And I think 20, 30 years ago, we were smarter, we were more astute, we were more politically aware. We basically had more common sense. And I would blame this new situation we've got. If we are to believe the politicians who say to us, look, you need protecting. You need protecting from Tracy and Stevenage with her racist rants. If we do, then I think we have to blame the big state, the deep state, for nannying us for the last 30 or 40 years. I don't live in the UK, but the last time I came to London, I almost wet myself laughing because I came in summer, got on the tube at London Airport, Heathrow, and as I was getting into London, as it came out of the tunnel and sunshine hit the compartment, there was this very old Etonian BBC recording which came on, which said, in this sort of weather, it's advisable to carry a bottle of water with you. And I'm looking at people in front of me, and we're all laughing. And I'm thinking, what happened to my country? How stupid did we become? Well, we need to be treated like 5-year-olds. And the bigger question is, was that part of a bigger plan by the elites to treat us like 5-year-olds so that we can say at a later point, you need now protecting. You need protecting from scorching weather in July, which you didn't plan for, and you're not clever enough to work out to bring a bottle of drinking water with you. You need protecting from this swathe of information on the internet, which you're not educated to understand or process. I think this is all really very, very Orwellian. Orwell must be really laughing his socks off now at all this, because so much of what he's predicted seems to have come true. And this George is right about Elon Musk. I do appreciate the point he's making. He's saying Elon Musk is really all we've got against this, against the wokeism, against big state taking control. But there are other, I think, bigger questions we need to be asking. One of the things that distinguished the part of the world I'm in now, and Europe and in Britain, is that the terribly sad thing is, in a lot of Arab countries I've worked in, is that we don't even have freedom of speech. Worse than that, we don't have freedom of thought. People do not feel as though they're able to even entertain various political ideas or discussions when you meet educated people, in perfectly amiable environment. People they don't have the freedom of thought. They haven't had it for decades. And so before you have freedom of speech, you need freedom of thought. And what I'm seeing in Arab countries, whereby people cannot get into a discussion with you because they don't have the experience of thinking outside of the box. They've been taught how to think for decades and decades. Now, what I'm afraid of is that we're starting to go down that road in the UK. I think people are now being nannied by big media, which is in the pocket of the big state. And big media is teaching you how to think. This is how you should look at racism. we'll give you 2 or 3 scenarios. Don't go beyond those parameters because you're really stupid. So we're going to show you how to think about racism. And what happens is you get to a situation which is so ludicrous now, is that white people in Britain do not have the right to talk about racism because they are the wrong color, which is why the opinion editor of the independent newspaper, they've got about half a dozen, one of those opinion editors was a black lady, who insulted me on Twitter and told me, basically, we're not looking for your kind of person to write opinion pieces for us. And that was amazing. That was a real eye-opener for me. That was basically a way of saying, you're not qualified to talk about racism. I wanted to publish an article about racism in German television that I worked for many years, and I experienced white-on-white racism, and I was basically cancelled and told to shut up and forget my idea and then blocked. And I think this is the problem we've got now, is that the way we have brainwashed people in the Middle East and Arab world, now elites in Europe and Britain are going along the same lines. And I think all of this policing of the internet is all part of it. I think, it's going to be very, very difficult in the coming years for people to really think freely and to express themselves freely, because they are now becoming zombies. And this is really, the whole Orwellian nightmare is actually coming true, unfortunately.
No, that's certainly right. Well, what I love about this program is you get some great academics who watch, who've written into us as well. So Edward Skidelsky, a philosopher at Exeter University and director of the Committee for Academic Freedom, which is a leading new free speech campaign group. He's written to me and talk about the open letter he's written to Bridget Phillipson, which he and 540 plus signatures to date, including academics from all disciplines and all types of university, including Richard Dawkins, Kathleen Stott, and also Lord Andrew Roberts. It's an open letter, which is basically saying how appalled they are about the refusal to implement this legislation, which has already received, as I say, royal assent, so it should be passed in law. The fact that this is not happening is appalling to a lot of people. We've got to be able to discuss this. Last word to you, George. What's your take on all of this?
I don't have much to add. Look, put very simply, the governments of the UK, governments of the EU, the governments of NATO regard their enemy, not Russia, they regard their enemy as their own people, because they know that their own people don't really buy into any of their agenda. They don't even buy into whether it's war against Russia and Ukraine. They don't buy into the Green New Deal. They don't buy into multiculturalism. They don't buy into mass immigration. And they're afraid that if they were to give them the power to actually implement their views of the world, then of course their power would be the power of these leaders, whether it's Starmer, whether it's Ursula von der Leyen or Thierry Breton, that would be challenged. So therefore they wage war against their peoples. And therefore they have to use the social media to wage war against their people, because what happens on social media, well, people start talking to one another. They start communicating their ideas, and those ideas are inimical to the ideas of these elites. So that's why it's so important for them to crack down on social media. They have to crack down on their enemies.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, they point out in this letter, they say it's an important piece of legislation. It's absolutely vital, they say, and academics and students of all persuasions need the protection afforded by the Freedom of Speech Act. It's clear that our freedom of speech and the rights that we have are being eroded, and we need to continue calling that out, which we will do here on the Muckrakers. I'll be back with you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Dr. George Samueli, Martin J, always a pleasure to see you both. Thank you very much for joining me. Take care. We'll see you next time.